All right. We're good. We're ready to get started, guys. I'm ready for this. Let's have some fun. Okay. So everybody, we're glad you're here. We're looking forward to a great session, and I'm going to give you a quick rundown on what you can expect. I'll introduce the panel here, and then we'll dive into the good stuff. So we're gonna do our intros. I'm going to lead off with about 15 minutes of sharing on some data, some research we have on what's happening around learning and skilling, and some of the opportunities and the very real challenges that you're all probably facing right now. And then we'll have a fireside chat where we're going to dig into some of the big topics, the hot button issues, and we're going to actually encourage you, if you have a challenge you're facing at your organization or a big question you're sort of trying to figure out how to tackle, drop it in the chat. You have the benefit of having a couple of amazing panelists here who are going to share with you and give you some insights on that. And then we'll wrap up with some closing thoughts towards the end there. So we're excited to be here with you, looking forward to a great conversation. So I'm joined here. I'm Ben Eubanks, the Chief Research Officer for Lighthouse Research Advisory. I think I'm the data nerd on the panel, although in our prep session, all of us probably have a little bit of a flavor for using the data to get better results. So I'm excited to be here with you. I'm a researcher, a best-selling author, and a speaker. And I love taking these very complicated topics and making them easy to understand with data, with stories, things like that. So looking forward to that today. We also have Erick Allen here with us from Cornerstone. Erick, you want to do a quick intro and tell us something fun about you that's maybe not in your official bio?
Well, Erick Allen, I'm a senior principal in thought leadership and advisory services at Cornerstone OnDemand. Glad to be here and part of this conversation. And I guess the one thing that is not in my bio and probably never end up in my bio is my high school job was being Chuck E. Cheese, not working at Chuck E. Cheese, but dressing as the rat. So that is my claim to fame, but glad to be here.
I don't know what I have to say to that. Actually, that's pretty impressive and incredible. And look how far you've come. So we can only hope that all of
people still ask me to sing happy birthday to their kids. So it's, it's kind of a,
when you're known for something, Erick, you got to use that skill. That's a good way to tie that into the conversation today. And we also have James Burnham here with us from Skillable. James, quick intro on yourself, please, and something fun from your bio.
Yeah. First of all, that's just such an awesome one, Erick. That's so fun. That's great. So yeah, I'm James Burnham. I'm a principal solutions architect here at Skillable. So I work a lot with our customers in helping them shape what their kind of skilling journey is going to look like and implementing hands-on experiences within it and making it just a much more immersive experience for their learners. Fun fact for me, I would say, is like I'm a big diver. I really like to dive, and this isn't nearly as fun as being a Chuck E. Cheese rat, but I've since kind of paused on doing it, but I was for a long time a volunteer diver at our aquarium. So I was in kind of regularly, pretty much weekly, in with the tiger sharks, and that was a fun trip.
That's the second time you brought up sharks in the conversation, James. You'll have to weave that one in one time later towards the end as we're talking about skills in some really complicated area. I need you to bring up sharks at least one more time just to round out that trifecta. So no pressure, but I'm going to expect that. And the audience is probably going to expect that too now that I've said it. So we have a waiting audience. They're excited. There's already fans of all of those wacky things. It's like, I was trying to think when you mentioned that, Erick, like what's a fun fact about my career background that would be something just kind of out there. I was like, you know what? I worked in a machine shop making jail cell door hinges when I was 16 years old. And I always had this fear that I would see in the news, like this string of breakouts because the hinges failed on the doors. And I'm like, oh gosh, that was all my fault. So thankfully that never happened to my knowledge anyway. But as a 16-year-old, that was a pretty interesting experience. I made the basketball needles that you use to air out the basketballs. I did all kinds of fun stuff like that. And I'm terrible with my hands, though. That's the thing that you have to know about me. That's not a skill I have. And so somehow miraculously made it through all that. So you got a great panel here with you today. We have skills relevant to this and wildly irrelevant to the conversation today, but we're excited to be here with you and share some good stuff. So gentlemen, if you want to step back to the backstage, I'm going to jump in, talk to the audience about some of the data we have, some of the things, sets the stage a little bit and the context around this. And then we'll bring them back shortly for our fireside chat portion and get into the discussion and really plumb the depths of this conversation, give you some good insights from a different set of perspectives. So I'm excited. Let's dive right in. And as I mentioned already, I love stories to help convey big ideas. And so I want to tell you a story about another skill that I really don't have. So years ago, I was on the track team for my school, and the high jumper was out sick that day. And the coach said, we need someone to do this high jump. Who's going to step up and support the team? And you've seen the movies where someone's standing there and everyone else steps back and the person's left standing there. That was me. So I got left standing in the front and voluntold to do the high jump. I did it once and never again, because I wasn't very good at it. But as I was doing that, I was learning about how to do the jumps and the techniques, everything else. And I learned about this gentleman named Dick Fosbury. Back in the 50s, he had this unique style that we all use today to do the high jump, where you run and you jump backwards over the bars, that weird, awkward looking thing. Well, prior to that, people would run and jump forwards over the bar. And when he started doing that, of course, it was different. It was weird. It was awkward. And so people everywhere kind of made fun of him and said, he doesn't know how to do this. Look at him. Until he went to the Olympics and got a medal for his performance. And what's wild to me is the very next Olympics, the majority of the competitors in that event used the Fosbury flop, as Bill just called out in the chat. Yes, Bill, you knew it. The Fosbury flop is what they used as that new technique to do it, because it was enabling them both figuratively and literally to reach new heights. And so I'm sharing that because we're talking today about skills and changing how we do that and trying to have a different approach. And I want you to hear that we think change is almost always bad or scary or worrisome. But that's a great example of how something changed and it led to better potential outcomes in the future. And as we're going through today, talking about some of the opportunities that exist for you to serve your employees, to create better opportunities for your learners, to help take care of your customers through the learning experiences and the skills you're building for your people, that change can be a good thing. And here's what I'm going to share with you for the next 12 minutes or so. I'm going to give you the storm clouds first. The research says that we need to end on an up note. So I'm going to give you the downside first. What's out there, some of the data points, some of the things that are not going to make you smile, probably. And then I'm going to finish with the sunshine. I'll tell you what the opportunities are. I'll give you some examples of those. I'll finish up with a fun story, but I'll give you some examples of ways we can be looking at this, ways to be positioning this as internal priority for investment and support, ways to think about developing the skills of your people and to avoid one of the biggest pitfalls that I think is out there right now. And so let's get into this stuff. I'll tell you some of the data and share with you as we go. So this big study we did last year, over 1,000 different global organizations and 1,000 different learners across the world. We gathered some different data on different things related to skill building, talent mobility, how we're growing our people, and you're going to see some of those stats from that. So let's dive right into this. The first three here that I'm going to share with you are our storm cloud stats. We're going to call them that. Number one, 6 out of 10 leaders, like all of you, talent, learning, executives, people who are doing this work every day, 6 out of 10 say that their workforce is not highly adaptable to change. That creates a really tough environment when we don't have the trust and the belief that our people can respond to changing conditions. I don't know if there's a pandemic that happens. I don't know. Maybe there's a new competitor that enters the market. Maybe there's an innovation in technology like AI that changes how the company is going to have to run in the future. And 6 out of 10 of us don't believe that our people are going to be able to respond to that change and adapt in a way that they need to, which creates a scary proposition for us. Not only that, but fewer than half of the companies that we surveyed in this research said that they know their gaps of their workforce and have a plan to address them. Now, more than that knew what those gaps were or had started looking at what those might be. You may actually know some of the gaps in your own workforce, but fewer than half actually have a plan in place to address them. And I use this picture specifically, this image, because we often hear the phrase, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. When a skills gap becomes an issue, we'll look at that point and try to decide. I don't know about you, but I would not want to try to cross this bridge. And oftentimes we wait until that situation looks like that before we try to cross it. And I would encourage you, we need to have more urgency there, not just for its own sake, not because skills is the big conversation in the market, though it is, but because it's an opportunity for us to do better, to use our people's resources, their strengths more effectively, to leverage what they're bringing to the table, because we've seen the data that brings them to life when we say, hey, I see what you offer. We're going to tap into that skill. We're going to tap into that experience, that strength that you bring to the table. We're seeing better results from that. And I'll show you in a minute what those results are. All right, and our third storm cloud stat here, 7 out of 10 companies that we talk to say that not knowing the skills of their people, not having a clarity there, creates an actual cost or burden. It's not just a neutral impact. It creates a cost to the organization. I have seen this myself. When I was an HR leader running an HR team for an organization, we had something happen that was like a one-off sort of thing, but it bubbles up across bigger organizations where we went out to hire in the market because we didn't know that we had an employee with the aspiration and a skill in a certain area. We stepped around them to hire, and that person quit because they thought we weren't paying attention to their interests, their abilities, and their hopes to grow in that career path. That happens when we don't know those. And there's lots of other examples too, where we can't be as efficient with our resources. We can't be as efficient with plugging people into the right teams and utilizing their strengths that they bring to the table if we don't know what they are. Now, those are some of our storm cloud stats. I'm not the storm cloud guy usually, so I'll give you some sunshine. I'll give you some positive things here. Now, this is a really interesting visual representation of the value of the S&P 500, the 500 biggest companies in the U.S. stock index. And what you see if you look back 50 years is that the vast majority of the value for those companies back then, 83% of the value, was in tangible things, stuff you could put your hands on: plants, property, equipment, inventory, resources, trucks, all that stuff that you can put your hands on and touch, the tangible assets. Today, that's completely flipped. The vast majority of the value in those companies, 90% of it, is in intangible assets, intellectual property, patents, trademarks, and I would argue the skills of your people. The skills of your people in the business are a key part of that intangible value that your organization rests on, and you can leverage to solve big problems for your customers, to create new products, to create new ways of solving problems. Those things are a part of that. And we have the responsibility and opportunity to help the company get the most from those resources. Now, I highlighted a minute ago that this isn't just about doing this because it's a trend, doing this because consultants told us to, but we're doing this because it leads to better outcomes for our business and for our people. And here's what we see with that. When we actually look at organizations or people that have a high retention likelihood versus low, we see that when their companies are building their skills for today, that's an 80% bump statistically in their interest in staying at the company. And they're not just sticking around, they're actually performing better. It's the compound interest of a great employee. And the same thing happens when we're developing them for the future as well. That same bump happens. And even when we're helping someone find a sense of meaning and purpose in their work. I know that may seem like it's a sort of a soft measure, but what we can tell from the research is when someone says, I'm developed well on the job, they don't only feel better about their work environment, but about their life outside of that. They feel more control over everything because they have skills that they can use to address the problems that they face. We see this in some of the newer data around AI disruption of skills. We have 7 out of 10 workers tell us that they're worried about the skills they have because AI is disrupting that, and they worry about the future of that. And we say, okay, what are you going to do about it? They don't say, well, I'm just going to sit in the corner and cry. I'm going to actually develop myself. They say, I want to reskill, and I'm depending on my employer to help me do that. They're looking to all of you to help them make that case, make that happen. One of the things that we all hope for, we hope that our people will lean forward when we're offering development opportunities. We hope they're going to be excited about those. But what we find is when we ask them, what would help you be more interested in growing and learning at work? The number one thing that leads to that is learning that's actually aligned to where they want to go. What I'm doing now or I want to be. The more closely aligned that is, the better. And that's one of the things that we'll probably hear from James, if I had to guess later on. One of the things Skillable does is it helps people to actually practice that skill in an environment closely mimicking what they've been doing in that job, in that career path, and helping them to build that skill so they're ready to do it with confidence when the day comes. That's what people are looking for, what they hope for from the workforce. And jump past that one and talk for a minute about some of the ways that we can measure skills. Got a few more minutes left before we transition back to our fireside chat here. One of the things that we see in the data is that there are different ways we can look at skills measurement, trying to figure out what skills our people have. And skills inference has had a huge increase in the last few years. A lot of the AI tools are making those things smarter. There's still an inference just means guess. Okay, it's a fancy way of saying we're guessing based on some signals we can see. We see tools that are using resume parsing to try to guess what skill someone has. I don't know about you, but sometimes I've seen resumes where people are putting things in that they don't really have. They're not really good at, and they're putting them in anyway to try to show up for a job search. We look at things like training completions to assume someone has that skill. It's not great sometimes to do that. I can tell you some fun stories about people that I have not hired, even though I saw their training records, because they didn't have the skills they claimed that they did. And even looking at digital footprints, let's look at the kinds of interactions they're having in the business, the kind of conversations they're participating in our help forums, and start attributing some skills to them based on those things. Those are all examples of inference. We're also seeing some more validated approaches as well. And that's what gives me some confidence and some encouragement as a leader that we can make decisions based on skills using that. Looking at performance data. What do we know about your performance? What can we prove about that? What can we see about your performance and tie that back in and prove that you have that skill or not, or the strength of that skill? Looking at feedback from people around you. We're using assessments, letting us put you through the paces, see what you can do, and we can either show that you're capable of doing that thing or not, whether it's making a jail cell door hinge, whether it's singing the happy birthday song for Chuck E. Cheese or some other sort of skill. We'd put you through a little test, an assessment, and let you see what's happening. You know, what's wild to me is when we ask people who are looking for work, people that are looking for jobs, would you rather submit your resume and then wait for a response, or submit your resume and take a short test to measure your skills? Candidates actually tell us they prefer that second one, which is wild because so many of us have been told, no, don't make it harder on people to apply. And we ask the candidates why they prefer that. Like, it tells me more about the job, more about the specific tasks I'll be doing in that work, what the company's looking for, and it tells me if I'm a good fit or not. I'm judged based on my ability to do that, not based on how well I wrote my resume or had ChatGPT write my resume. It's based on putting my best foot forward, and I'm judged on that. And then the last one here is manage your observations. I've left that one there as a validation piece, but I flagged it because there's an actual problem with that one. That's the most common way right now in the data. Employers are telling us they're measuring the skills of their people, trying to validate them. I'd love to hear from someone. You can jump in the chat if you'd like to. I'd love to hear from you. But why do you think manager observations may not be the very best option when it comes to validating the skills of your people? I'll give you like the 5-second countdown, and I'm going to jump right into it. Ann, first one off the bat, Ann. Well done. Excellent. Y'all are all reading off the same sheet of music. Excellent. Excellent. Managers are not objective. There's bias. Absolutely. So look at this. Okay. Manager observations aren't a bad thing, but they aren't the only thing we should be doing. And here's why. Any number of these, and some of these actually came from some of your answers here, any number of these are types of bias that affect our brains and how we make decisions. And if these are affecting how I buy bread at the grocery store, they're definitely affecting how a manager sees and perceives the skills of their people. If they get along well with that person, they're more likely to say, hey, they're great. They're probably good at this too. If they conflict a little bit because they don't see eye on things, they're going to mark them lower on their skills, even if they may have them to a great degree of proficiency. So those are very real things that hold us back from doing that. So manager observations aren't bad, but the only thing that you're using, you're missing a chance to really understand more about what your people can do and how they can do it. We need a couple of layers of assessment of insight there on their skills. I call it vectoring. Like when a plane is trying to go somewhere, they like vector in to get to the right place. These methods I just talked about here are different vectors that help us key in on what the skills our people have and where they can be placed, where they can be used. Two more quick things I want to share with you, just for some encouragement, or if you're like, listen, I'm on board with this, Ben, but how do I get other people on board with it? Here's one way. One of the program managers I used to work with back when I was an HR leader, his job all day, every day, was to look at risk and to manage risk. That's all he ever did. And so he looked at schedules, he looked at costs, he looked at all these different factors, trying to figure out what is the risk of us not hitting our target on time. And I'll tell you, there's a risk to us not knowing what our people can do. And not just guessing, not just inferring, but actually knowing what they can do. There's a risk to that. Because when they put them on a client project and they don't perform, that client could never be a client again. And there's a risk there. Some of the largest companies in the world that do consulting, I've been talking to some of them about how they're using things like skills validation to make sure they're putting the right people on the right project at the right time, so that is a successful conclusion as a customer all over again. So those are some very real risks that do exist. All right, got the warning sign there. Okay, so one last slide here for you, and then I'll tell you a story to wrap this up, and we'll bring our guys back, and we'll have our conversation. So skills is not just about talent. That's where my heart is. That's what I've done. That's what I love. But it's not just about the talent outcomes. It's not just about picking the right person, growing them in the business. It's not just about moving them around and finding a place for them. Those are important outcomes. But when we're trying to convey this to our leaders, we have to translate this to things that they care about. How having the right person with the right skill from a sales perspective leads to higher sales overall, more revenue. Or having the right person in the right seat from a quality control area leads to better product quality, which means fewer issues with returns and refunds and impacts to our profitability. And going down the line, really tying those things in, showing the outcomes from a business level, that business layer is so powerful and lets us have this conversation at a higher level, not just saying one individual skill for one person, but how we roll this up and show the impact that it can have across the business. Now, I've talked a lot about the company side of this. Let me give you a quick thing on what the learners tell us. The workforce tells us when we ask them, how do you want to learn a skill? Their number one way is I want to be able to try something, experience something. I want to be able to try something. I want to be able to experience something. And give me 1 second. Flip another mic. There we go. I want to be able to try something, experience something. That's how I want to learn and develop. We have to know what they want. Let me tell you this quick story. So there's a gentleman named John Ruhlin. The book's back there somewhere on the shelf called Giftology. It's a fun book to read, very short. And he talks about how using gifts as a way to connect with people and communicate to people creates new relationships. And he tells a story of when he proposed to his then girlfriend to try to get her to marry him. And it's the wackiest story that I've ever heard. So what he did is, back when the notebook was popular, he was going to fill up this notebook full of stories of their time together. He was going to sneak that to her, have a friend doctor him up so he looked like he was elderly, get on the plane next to her, and then pop the question in midair, which is, again, it sounds so crazy to say it out loud, and that's what his plan was. And it was all going according to plan. He had the notebook filled out with their stories, so beautiful, so sweet. He had snuck that to her. He was about to go to the airport, and he passed out at security. Well, he wakes up in the holding cell with handcuffs on because they don't like you making yourself up to look like someone you're not. And he's trying to get out of this issue, this sticky situation, by saying, hey, bring her back. She'll vouch for me. And he ultimately gets out of the hot water he was in. But when she finally talks to him, she says, you should have just asked me. Instead of you deciding what you want to do or giving the gift you wanted to give, you should have given the gift I wanted to receive. And this translates back to how we're serving our learners. We can't just give them the training that we've given them always. We can't just give them a bunch of content and courses. Those things do matter. Those things are helpful. But if that's all we do, we're missing a chance, because they want to learn through experiences most of all. They want a chance to test, to try, to fail in a safe space so they can try it again and build that skill up to a level of confidence and proficiency that they can put into practice every day in their work, because that creates those outcomes around retention, the outcomes around buy-in at work, about excitement and engagement at work, like I shared earlier from those stats. Okay, excellent. So I'm going to transition back here. I'm going to bring our two panelists back to the stage, and we're going to actually have a conversation about some of these sorts of things we talked about here, some other insights from Erick and James about what they're seeing with the clients they're working with. And let me get our slides dropped down off the screen so we can see all of that. All right, guys, welcome back. Glad you're here. And we're going to dive right into this because we're going to have some fun. So, Erick, I'm going to throw this first one to you, if you don't mind. So, the research I was just sharing, one of the stats in there I didn't share yet is that when we ask the workforce, only 16% of them say that their company is adequately developing them for future success in their job, even though with a lot of time, money, effort is spent by people trying to build up development. What do you think we're missing here?
You know, I think there are a couple of things missing. And first of all, that was a great presentation for the lead up. So thank you for that. That was awesome. But you know, it's one of the things I talk about to people is kind of the workforce gap and then the visibility gap. And the visibility gap is basically a two-way gap that people have that says, do I have a clear line of sight of what's next for me in my career and what are the skills that I need to get there? But also, does the organization have the full inventory of the skills that are in the workforce? And so when you talk about the 16% of employees feel their skills are developed for future success, that other percentage may just not have a good, clear line of sight of what skills the organization is going to be looking for in the future. So they don't necessarily know how they fit in. And then conversely, does the organization know all of the skills that a person brings in? And I often talk about the recruitment process is, we've done a really good job of getting people to narrow themselves when they come into the organization. Because of machine learning, AI, everything else, if you don't seem to be that ideal candidate, you may get kicked out. So job seekers have learned to be extremely narrow applying for a job. The question is, once they get into your organization, are you giving them the ability to then expand themselves and tell you that they were once, a character at a, pizza place singing happy birthday? Not that that's going to be a skill you can use more than likely, but do you allow them to expand themselves and give you that full book of skills and experiences that they have? So I would answer it that way. It's really the combination of the visibility gap, but also what you talk about not, giving the right opportunities to expand the skills that are needed for development in their career.
James, what are you thinking on that one?
Yeah, I fully agree. I would kind of add a little bit to it in the sense of, I think that there's a lot on the business and what the business can do to help a learner or just their employees feel more empowered. And I think that right there is a big part of it, right? Let's say 16% feel that their skills are developed. Maybe 50% are at the right spot, right? But they don't feel that they are. So there's a level of there's a confidence that they lack. And whether maybe that's warranted, right? Maybe they are an individual that is not quite where they need to be, but maybe they are where they need to be, but they just don't know, right? So they need that level of confidence. And to Erick's point, they somewhat need to know, what are the marks, right? What are the skills that I need to be good at? And am I good at them, right? Maybe I think I'm good at them, but I have some insecurities, right? Maybe somebody tells me I'm a great speaker, but in my head, I'm like, dude, I don't think I'm such a great speaker. I'm really uncomfortable when I'm speaking, and I don't know. So how do I build that confidence, and how do I get validated that I am a good speaker? Whether that's, just my boss is the one who tells me yeah, dude, speaking is great. You need to speak. You do it awesome. Don't change anything. That alone can be a good level of validation, just reinforcement, right? Telling people, much less if there's other outside tools that you use to validate.
That reminds me, I was talking yesterday. So my son was in a talent show yesterday for this after school group he's in, and he was going to do some magic for the group. And I said, listen, you can't just do magic. How you talk matters more than what you actually do with your hands. And he got up there and he was so comfortable doing the magic part, but he had not practiced the speaking. And afterwards, he's like, I'm not going to do that again without knowing what I'm going to say. And so that awareness, as you were talking about, the confidence, James, of any skill, right? We replace that with a skill we have to use at work. We have to serve a customer for the first time, or we have to troubleshoot a computer issue for the first time, or whatever the job happens to be. Anyone out there in the audience, you pick someone in your organization, think about a role they're in, and then a task they have to do, and think about the first time they do that, whether they're ready for it or not. So the confidence affects that. And Erick, that also, for me, the confidence piece comes with it from that vision casting you were talking about. Do we cast this vision of what this looks like, what your skills look like? Here's the path, right? So often managers sort of leave it I'm sure Erick knows exactly what's next for him and where he's going. And if he has questions, he'll ask me. And that's foolhardy. That's silly. That's not going to happen. And the people are always going to assume the worst. They're like, I guess I'll be doing this job until I die or until I leave. That's what they'll think, right?
Yeah. Well, and it also, plays into culture too, because if depending on the culture you have in your organization, if it's not a culture of development, it's a culture of compliance, then you may not feel that there's ever that opportunity to develop and grow. So you've also got to look at the culture of the organization layered on top of the expectations. And I often tell people the thing about having no expectations is the employee is always going to meet them. The company's not going to have them. So you've got to have that clear line of sight and that expectation setting.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to say it one more time, Erick, if you don't mind, because I didn't even write that down. That was great.
No, well, no, if you don't have expectations, the view is typically the employee will never meet him.
Yes.
Because that's what the way employees will feel in that culture of compliance only. Yeah. They'll never be able to meet him. And the organization will feel like they're not achievable. And so you're stuck in that middle area. So having that clear line of sight actually also helps managers in performance management. And we're talking about training. Mm-hmm. There's also a great correlation to performance management as well, because with those clear goals, you can have an honest conversation of not only here are where your skills are deficit. Think of skills as the new language of the organization. These are where your skills are different, not just or deficit, not just your performance, but your skills. But then to kind of like what James was talking about, here's how we're going to help you get to where we need you to be, and then validate that you've now met that mark. And this will be how we progress you in your career.
Yes. Okay. So you're sharing good like one-liners. I'll share one more really quickly, and we'll go to our next question. And I'm going to pitch to you, James. Heads up. So one of the things that we found in our research last year, we hear about like learning cultures and cultures of learning and things like that, and it's always this sort of vague thing. And it's like the expectations thing reminded me of it, Eric. What we found in the data is there were two key things that tied back to success or failure. That was autonomy and opportunity. Do I have the choices as a person to develop some skills with some autonomy, some choice where I'm going to go? And you may say you have all the choice you want. You have 47 hours to fit in your 40-hour work week. Good luck making that happen, building any of those skills. And so do we have the opportunity to? And so, James, I want to come to you because y'all are helping people have the opportunity through some of the work y'all are doing at Skillable to build these skills, create some confidence around those. We're going to transition to our next question. I want to ask you, there are so many new trends, new disruptions, all these sorts of things that are popping up here. As Eric said, like skills is the conversation right now, but it may be something else next month. Who knows? So for the people that are listening in here right now, what advice would you give them to help that are feeling some of that fatigue, some of that challenge, that stress just brought on by constantly trying to adapt and respond to those? What would you give them as a takeaway or a piece of advice that might help?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's obviously always innovations, and right now we're in this big kind of AI cycle, right? Where everything is now AI powered in some way or another. And the big thing with any of this, whether it's skills is the new hot thing, or AI is the new hot thing, or AI-based skills, or whatever the concept is, right? I think the big thing is don't be cautious at least of just jumping on the hype train, right? Even if leadership is kind of like, hey, AI is the big thing, we have to get AI. Right? It's like, great, okay, we can do that. We can get AI, but still kind of do your vetting, right? Feel out if the product or the tool or whatever you're considering, the new process, maybe that's what it is, whatever it is, feel it out, do a little bit of vetting. Maybe it's even only a week of vetting, right? But like dedicate some time to it and identify, is this tool or this process or whatever, the hype train is on about, is it something that's going to have real impact based on like either data you're seeing on it or even just a gut feeling? It can be a gut feeling for sure, but you need to like have a level of, back to that confidence, right? Us as people in this industry have to have a level of confidence. Is this new thing going to have real life impact if we implement it? Or is it really just like a whole bunch of sugar coating and it's just kind of the new buzz right now, and then in 6 months it's going to fade away and we wasted all of our time putting a bunch of energy into it? Or maybe using AI as an example here, there are certain AI tools that are going to be, life-changing and world-changing for this industry. And there's other AI tools that are, just that sugar-coated, like lipstick on a pig kind of like, hey, we're AI for learning. So even just identifying the difference in those two, like, yes, we know AI is going to be hugely impactful in the industry. What's the real impact versus what's the current AI, like, let's just get it sold type thing.
So far, my two big takeaways are Eric's Chuck E. Cheese background, and James, when he says AI for learning, does this with his hands. And he's like, listen, if the person's doing this, immediately walk away the other direction. Anything they say is null and void. Don't get sucked into it, because it's not going to actually, it's lipstick on a pig, as you said, James. It's not going to impact that. I'm going to co-opt a comment from Renee really quickly and then come back to you, Eric, for your answer to this sort of, how do we deal with those trends that just never stop coming at us, and the burnout stress. Renee talked about, in answer to that manager bias thing, she said people may not know what good looks like. And I think for me, when it comes to this thing we're talking about here, part of success for all of you and not getting caught up in the hype train, not getting caught up in this, is knowing what good looks like for you. And that may include something like AI. That may include something like validated skills. It may include something like personalized learning. And it may not include that, or you may have a workforce that this doesn't, fit for. This, you got to figure out what that is and what good looks like for you and march towards that, because we are going to give you some big ideas, some big trends, some things we're seeing. Here's some things we've seen be successful, but your people better than we do. Your workforce better than we could. And so we need you to be hearing what we're talking about, and then combining that with what you know of your people and what good could look like for your organization, because that's important. So Renee, I co-opted your comment from earlier, but it was a good one when it came in. All right, Eric, coming back to you now on this conversation around how do they have an anchor in this sort of stormy sea of change and just navigate that whole thing?
Yeah, James pretty much nailed it. So I'm going to stick with put my organizational psychology hat on and keep talking about culture, because I think the one thing I would add to what James said is when you're thinking about all this change, we always say change is inevitable, change is ongoing. We have all the cliches about change. The question I always ask people, is your organization built for resiliency and safety? Do you have the resiliency to deal with the change as it comes, where there can be a little bit more trust and buy-in? And I know that's always a tricky conversation, but so many leaders are always waiting to sell an idea or get buy-in. But it's also about building trust as a leader to be able to be trusted upward in an organization to say, look, this is the skills thing. It's coming. We got to talk about it. We've got to do this. You're going to need to trust me to a certain point, because we do get that analysis paralysis where we may be evaluating skills and whether it's the right thing. 3 years later, we've never done anything. We've never implemented it, and our competition is moving forward, and we're losing in the market. And then you got the safety, the emotional and psychological safety of the employee base to move into something new, to adopt this change. Will they be okay if this goes forward? And AI is a huge red light just shining about psychological and physical safety. You may have the best AI tools for HR, but if someone feels like their data is not going to be protected, they're worried about what the outcomes are going to be, how much of this is going to be shared on the open AI network, all the things they're hearing. If you're not doing just as much time creating that safety as you are creating the innovation, you're never going to have the adoption or the trust that you need to move forward in this AI world. So it's I really look at that, as the resiliency. Is the resiliency there? Is the safety there in order to adopt and move into what we're looking at as this robot revolution?
Robot revolution, man. You used some of the words there, Eric, on that. And one of the things we looked at in this study around the workforce is we said, do you feel accepted, respected, and appreciated at work? And if they did, that ties into their measure of belonging. Like, I feel connected. I feel like my voice matters, those sorts of things. And what's wild to me is if you look at that group, you compare them with people that don't agree with that. The people that do, they are raising their hand every time you say, hey, we've got a new opportunity. They're like, whatever it is, yes. Well, they don't even care what it is yet. They're like, yes, put me in, coach. You got to build a new skill? Sure. A new experience I can test out? Yes. A new piece of content that you developed? Can I see it? Putting on a mentor? Sure. They want all of those things when those things are in place, Eric. And the inverse is also true. If none of those things are in place, you can't get them excited about the opportunities to develop. They don't have that level of confidence that, James, you were talking about earlier, where someone's like you puff up, just like, I can do that. I feel confident that I can do that when the time comes, when push comes to shove, I'm going to be able to accomplish that task, do that thing, because I built the skill in a way that I'm comfortable with, not just I watched the 10-minute training video and now who knows what's going to happen next. So important there. And some good conversations here from the audience as well, talking about some of the pieces that have been coming out in the conversation so far. So again, any of you want to question, you've got a comment on any of this, please drop in the chat. We'd love to hear from you, hear your take. If we mess up, if we're wrong, if we miss something critical, let us know too. We'd love to hear from you because you all have your perspectives as well. We'd love to hear from. So,
well, Ben, real quick, I want to hit on something. I'm looking at the chat, and Jennifer and May are talking about the highly matrixed organizations that we work in now, and and I think that really goes back into expectations as well, because you guys are both right. Someone's HR manager may not necessarily be the person that can see their day-to-day work. But as James talked about earlier with the validation of skills, you can kind of flatten that. If you're measuring someone based on, if you've done a good job with your architecture, your job architecture, and you know the skills that are required to be competent in the job and the level of that skill, if you're measuring them on that, you take away the anecdotal, how a manager feels. And in a highly matrixed organization, the feeling can also create that. We all know the halo and the horn effect, and an employee is at the mercy of someone's feelings. But if you're truly using skills and you are a committed skills-based organization, that matrix is not so much of a barrier to measuring performance and skills output.
Yep. Yeah, and then that even, so getting into a little of Lisa's question there, which I'm curious, Ben, your perspective as our research guru.
Uh-oh.
But there is also a level of importance there, even like the level that you're looking at skills, right? So for example, when you think of like hard skills, there's a level of like, hey, how well do you know networking, right? Like for your job role, that might be important, right? You know networking, let's say it's a rough 1 to 10 scale, like are you a 1 or are you a 10? But now, like if you're the guy who's like running the company's infrastructure team and doing mission critical stuff, there's probably a lot of subcategories to networking that you care about, right? It's not just like, oh, great, you know networking. It's no, do you know cloud networking? Because we do nothing but cloud, right? So now you get into those sub things. So I think that's part of that matrix too, is like where you hone in on the right skills at the right levels is important to how you build out your kind of skills strategy within.
Yeah. So I'll tell you really quickly. The first thing, Lisa, you made me do it. Okay, I have this prop over here that I keep to the side of my monitor just in case I need it. And so when I think of a lot of the skill strategy for companies, it ends up looking like the old competency models like this. And you're like, oh, great, we got a competency model. Let's blow the dust off. Like, let's see what's in there. Because it's so static, it's so set in stone, one point in time, one snapshot, that it's not dynamic enough to flex to what's changing, what's adapting, and to some of the business units, things like that level of insight. So your question, what's better? I have a couple perspectives on that. I'm going to like tap dance a little bit. So I talked recently with leader of learning at Fannie Mae. And one of the things that he was telling me is that when someone comes to the LMS that they have, he wants them to see where they are going. Not just what we're doing today, but where we're going as an organization, what's important to us. And he said, if you can log in there and you can look at all the stuff and you could copy and paste the logo of some random company and put it in there and it would be the same stuff. He said, I have failed. I have not done a good job of helping to cast that vision we talked about here about what we're trying to accomplish as an organization. So our leadership decides these are the 5 skills that are critical for us to succeed long-term. Those are going to be prominently featured when someone comes in there. So some of that is prescriptive as part of that. But at the same time, we all know that, as you said, that example, James, on networking is a great example. You can go as far down as you need to go, down to the person doing the work as an individual contributor. Goodness, can't say that one. And that person is going to have this span on that specific work that they do that we can't see from as far back as we are. So there's got to be some mix of that, I would argue. Can't be just one or just the other to be able to really do this well. Yes, some top level guidance, some recommendations and things. The problem we find often is we ask employers, we ask leaders like all of you, how are you flooding this stuff down or passing this down to your people? 6 out of 10 said, well, we're actually telling our managers and sharing our strategy so they'll share it to their people. We ask employees, how do you know what skills are important for you to develop? 7 out of 10 say, I've got to figure it out myself. So we are telling managers, and for whatever reason, they are a bottleneck, they are a choke point, and that's not getting through. That vision we're trying to share is not there. And that's why having that more prescriptive, where anyone can access that, gives them a little bit of insight into where the company's going. So again, we could spend a whole time on that one. There's a lot of good stuff in that conversation.
And Ben, I know we're so off track here, but this is such a good conversation. But one of the analogies, at the risk of losing people, because I know sports analogy is always bad, but this is the one that I use with kind of what we've all been talking about. The organization is the quarterback. The football is a skill. The receiver is running. Anyone that knows about a quarterback-receiver relationship, you cannot throw the ball to where the receiver is because they're in motion. The employees are moving. You've got to lead them to where you want the organization to go. So the quarterback has to take that skill and throw it far enough to lead the employee so they can go and capture it, so they can move forward, not learning the skills of today, but moving forward. Because if you throw it to where they're standing now, it's either incomplete or interception. That's a failed business plan. So you've got to be strategic in how you're doing these skills and putting them far enough into the future to build your workforce. We all know with the workforce, you either build, borrow, or buy. You want to build it, but the way to do that is not necessarily focus on the skills today, but look at your organization and where it's going to be in 3 to 5 years. What skills are going to be outdated, and then lead them into the future so that you're always future ready, future forward with your skills developed.
That's a great point. And I think James and I were trying to figure out if the skills are the birthday kid and the pizza is the company and you're there as Chuck E. Cheese. Like, how does that all work? I couldn't get that translated in my head. I think the quarterback method there is better. So James, I want to come back to you because we've been talking about some of these things. And I think part of this is using using some learning methods, some skill development methods. Like we're talking about these bigger pictures. I don't think it's completely off track, Eric. I think we're building a separate track, sort of connecting here. James, one of the things that we talked about in prep for this is that things like immersive learning, all of that, we're trying to figure out ultimately, how do we get people learning hands-on? Because in a perfect world, everyone could do that. It's kind of hard to do that in some roles because it's expensive. I can't put you on an MRI machine because that MRI is cost us, a lot of money to run every hour. If it breaks down, that's a big expense. So how do we get people learning in a hands-on environment that's scalable, that reaches people? And because again, I share the data, like people want this, they're looking for this. And a lot of companies are trying to figure out how to make that possible.
Yeah, that's a super important question. I could talk on this for hours. I'm sure nobody wants to hear that. But a couple of things, just kind of leading back to some of your research is one, people want it, right? There's a lot of companies we work with doing industry level certifications, right? Think of hey, you want to prove you know how to network? You can go get different certifications from different consortiums, and they are pretty trusted, right? If you see on your resume, hey, you have a certification from people like CompTIA and other organizations, it's really trusted, right? They go, oh, great. CompTIA said you know networking really well. So there's a lot of customers that we work with that do those level of certifications. And what we've seen from their actual candidates is it does make a harder experience to do something like that in an immersive way, but they love it. So it's this big win-win, right? So now as an industry level certifier, right, somebody who really holds people's jobs in your hands, right, it gives you a much more validated way. It's the integrity on that kind of a certification is so much higher when somebody's in there doing the work versus somebody who just answered a bunch of multiple choice questions and maybe they guessed C the whole time and got lucky. So it just gives it so much better from the certifying body, but it's also that the candidates enjoy it. It's one of the rare win-wins in that kind of a world, right? It's a much better thing for everyone, and it's really, really awesome. I always make the kind of comparison where doing that kind of stuff in our more technical landscape now, our very computer-driven world, has, to your point, Ben, been very expensive for a long time. We're at a point now where you can do it much more scalable ways that we at Skillable are very involved in, but it's not new in the grand scheme of the world. I always like to make the comparison to nursing. Nurses have to go through practical, right? They have to prove that they can do the job before they actually get certified as a nurse. And it's no different in the technical landscape, but it's a gap we've missed for so long. We haven't been able to say, James, can you actually go in and deploy this network appliance or whatever it might be? Even in the soft skills world to some extent, we miss it. Mm-hmm. That's where the more we can get them in that environment in some way and get their hands in there. Skillable has a way to do it, but we're not the only way. If you can do it at all is the big key. People love it, and it gives you much more, stable data and real data of where is that person.
Yeah. With Eric, anything to add that? I've got a quick stat to add if you want to hear it, but
well, before you add your stat, because I can't compete with stats, I don't have numbers, but one of the things I'll add on, and I really like to, once again, kind of create that safety of this, is that the immersive ideology of training is not new. You can go all the way back to scavenger hunts and role playing and all the other stuff. I mean, that was immersive learning, in a way, because people really got into a scenario. What's done now is technology has improved not only the experience, but also the data collection and the safety. We all know that, we would go back in, old training classes, you do a role play, you're terrified. Because you didn't have that safety of, can I make mistakes and it'd be okay to make those mistakes? Can I learn from those mistakes in real time? That's really what the immersive, the VR, AR, whatever modality you're looking at can do now, is give people a more rich experience, a safe experience, but with real-time feedback and data on what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong, but also on the back end be using machine learning, AI, and other things to say, that's okay. We're going to show you where you can go get some more skills and then come back and do this again after you do. So it's truly creating a better ecosystem of development. If you talk about learning development, it gives you a much better ecosystem for someone to truly embrace learning instead of being shamed into knowledge.
Ooh, shamed into knowledge. My goodness. You were dropping some good ones, Eric. I'm glad you don't have a handheld mic because you had already broken it by now. The mic dropped. So the stat I was going to throw out there is we did a study on frontline workers specifically, and we said, what's the biggest barrier to being able to develop new skills? And the number one thing was time and schedule, probably no surprise. But the second one was, I don't have a chance to try it before I have to do it. And that confidence, I've used that word over and over again, but the ability to just know that when I have to do it, I'm going to be okay. Because in some of those roles, there's safety issues, there's other things. And so there's all kinds of impacts there. And being able to try it, test it, do it first. One of you mentioned, I think, James, you might have mentioned soft skills as part of this, is also coming into this. Seeing a lot of iteration now with some of the new Gen AI solutions in the market, giving that as an opportunity to build a soft skill through experience, through practice, through role playing, through simulations, where in the past it would have been one coach giving me feedback one at a time, and they could only scale it to so many people. And now we can get that to all of our people. There's some pretty wild opportunities that opens up as well. Okay, I'm watching the time. We got about 8 minutes or so left, something like that. And so I'm going to go. Let's get one more, because you know, I'm the data nerd in any room I'm in. And one of the things that I want to come back to, Eric, I'll let you start us off here, is how do we prove the value of this? How do we connect business impact to this? Because we can talk in our vacuum all we want to as a community here about the things we're caring about, we're excited about. And yet at some point we got to take it back to the business and say, invest in this. Let's make this happen. What is your best advice for someone, or what are you thinking on that? What do you see people doing that are successful there? Anything you'd like to share here, Eric, that might be helpful as a takeaway for the audience on that front?
I'll be real quick, and it's a little bit of like what you said, something very similar to this earlier. But make sure you're measuring the right things. The alignment is really key, and making sure you know the organization's goals, the people priorities within those goals, and then what are the outcomes that you're going to have. And the outcomes have to be bifurcated. You have to have outcomes that are important and relevant to the leadership or the organization itself, I'll call it that, but also outcomes that are important to the learner. I think a lot of learning leaders, and early in my career, I fell into this trap too, where all of your advocates were the learners. Everything you did was built toward, the smile sheets. Did they enjoy it? Did they have fun? But when you are about to get your budget cut and you go into the boardroom, your advocates aren't sitting at that table. They're all out in the cubicles. And so you've got to build advocates in both places. So not only look at the ROI of what you're doing to justify the hard number costs, but look at the ROE, the return on expectation, those things in the causation realm. Because we do this, we expect people to be happier at their job. You can do that through engagement surveys. We expect there to be a reduction in call outs if you have a undesk worker population. There are things that you can say, we expect these things to causationally happen because we're investing in their development and their learning. So I would just say alignment, bifurcate your sources, make sure you have advocates, not only consuming the courses, but benefiting from those that consume the courses, and complete your strategy that way and continue to monitor it and measure it and adjust.
It's like a master class in building ROI from a learning investment there. James, anything you'd like to add in around that? That's all that Jennifer, give you a shout out. Her comment just now was a great example of, this is about tying back to their confidence. They show up for a customer, and they're showing up for that customer with confidence because they're using tools like Skillable to do that. Anything you'd want to add here around the importance of proving the value back, showing ROI, those sorts of things?
Yeah, a lot of what Eric just went through is almost exactly what I was going to say. So it's, to me, there's kind of like two steps here. One is you have to identify what skills are going to have the highest impact in your business. Right. And then start kind of like make those your focus. Right. And the impact, exactly to Eric's point, doesn't necessarily mean dollars. Right. Maybe that is right. We're going to make more money if we harden these skills. But maybe it's just like, hey, our systems are going to go down less if we make these skills a lot better. It could be any number of things. Right. Up to your business, what that means. Identify what skills are going to make the biggest impact in your business. Start your focus there. And then the kind of second part of it is now, how do you validate those skills? And that's where there's a lot of options on how you can do that. It becomes a much more nuanced consideration. But now you at least have a, hey, we know these are our top 5 skills we need to target in that order. Now we just need a way that we know we can validate each of those 5 skills. So that way we can have the biggest return on impact right? Instead of calling it a return on investment, just like return on impact from this outcome here.
Yes, return on the impact there, where we just finished a big study on, we called it CPR, culture performance recognition, around some of the things that are near and dear to Erick's heart, I know for sure. And one of the things that stood out is when we asked leaders like all of you, how do your leaders look for return from these things? They're looking for what we call ROE, return on employee. So productivity, performance, retention. I call that the compound interest of a great employee. Not only do they perform better, but they stick around longer doing that. And they're telling all their friends how great it is where they work. And I know that sounds like a big thing to say from just something as small as learning, or something that seems as simple as that because we're close to it. But as I said earlier, we've seen in the data so many times over the last 5 years where people say learning isn't just about me being better at the job that I'm doing. Yes, it does affect that, but it also gives me the sense of control over my bigger life out there and of everything that I've got to face long term. I mentioned the AI disruption of skills as an example of that. That's something they can't control. What can I control? The skills I do have. How do I reskill? How do I make sure I'm prepared for that? How do I adjust and get ready for whatever's next there? So I'm going to share a quick story here and probably wrap us up, because we're getting really close here on time. That helps me sort of wrap my head around this. So I was at an organization last year. I was invited up to Montreal to speak to a group there, and it was a healthcare organization. And I've got to tell you, I felt out of place. I was like, I don't know why I'm here, because I have my people over here, learning, talent. They're sitting over here as one big group. On the other side of the room is the head of cardiology, the chief nursing officer, other business roles, the CFO. And I'm thinking, like, this doesn't feel like the audience you're talking to. And so I get up, I'm sharing about recruiting, retention, talent development, all the things that we would care about and be excited about. And then their CEO gets up and she shows their SWOT analysis, their weaknesses, their threats, the challenges to their organization. And wouldn't you believe it? About half of the challenges, the threats, the issue that she was worried about keeping her up at night came to a lack of skills, a lack of talent depth in certain areas, the things that we were talking about. This is how she translated. She said, we are not going to be competitive. We're not going to be viable. We are not going to be stable as an organization. She may not call it in retention and learning ROI and all those things, but this is how she's talking about the things that we do. And that to me paints this picture that, as you two gentlemen have both shared, we've got to make this relevant to them. We've got to do it in a way that connects to what they care about. And that is going to enable us to serve that audience of learners, that audience of the workforce that we have the privilege of supporting and serving. So as we're wrapping up here with just a little bit left, any closing thoughts? I guess, hey, we got like a 5-minute extra time. So I know some of you may have to drop off, but I'm going to give both of you a chance to give us your parting shot. So like your 1 minute or less, big takeaway for the audience. You can double down on something you've shared, something that you haven't shared yet. I'll let each of you do that before we wrap up here. James, I'm going to tag you to go first.
Yeah, my final thought is just going to be a little bit of a takeaway to think about as you're thinking about any changes to your overall kind of learning strategy. Is I've also been kind of in the product side of the house, so my product brain always kicks in a little bit of, hey, what's the risk of inaction? If you guys do nothing, what's the impacts there? Because to me, it can range, right? It might be a low risk of, oh, okay, we're going to be a little bit inefficient in our processes. Maybe our implementation of a certain tool or something isn't going to be the best, but we're gonna move on. It'll be great. But it could be very mission critical, right? Ben, to your point of, hey, we're not going to be competitive because we lack certain skills in the market. Or it could be thinking on to like kind of back of the house type roles, right? If you're a software company or a physical company like a Boeing, right, or Airbus, right? If you're doing aircraft, somebody doesn't know how to put the screws into the right point. That can be like, you might cost lives at that point, much less the rest of your business being impacted. So have a really big thought on the risk. If you do absolutely nothing, what are the impacts there? And that'll help guide if you do need to start taking some actions and changing your positions.
Excellent. I think we give them a lot of fuel for urgency today, for sure, Erick. Excellent. James. Erick, back to you for your takeaway, your last one-liner, whatever you've got for us.
Yeah, no more one-liners. I don't think I do, but I'll just piggyback on what James said. Stagnation is expensive. There's your one-liner. Stagnation is expensive. Progress is scary. But it could lead to employee flight, innovation stagnation, lost revenue. I mean, all these things that you get from standing in place. Because if you're if you're standing in place, the markets are moving so fast, you're likely losing. And we all know that. So my last thought would be just start the journey. If you've been thinking about skills and how that fits into your ecosystem, just take the first step. They are the currency of the future. It's the best strategy to have in place to achieve workforce agility and kind of, close those workforce readiness gaps I talked about earlier. I talked about the visibility gap, but you also have the expectations gap of who's expecting what skills, and then just the overall skills gap. So you got those three gaps that make up the workforce readiness gap. And I would just say, start the process. Don't try to boil the ocean, but please, stagnation is expensive. But I know progress can be scary, but you've got to move forward.
Yeah. So my way of putting that, Eric, was standing still is falling behind. Yeah. We cannot do that. Everyone else is moving forward. So I love that. You got a thumbs up on the stagnation is expensive one as well in the chat there. So I'll use my last 1 minute that I've got with you for the question Lisa dropped in there. I'll try to hit this. So intertwining of learning and well-being. I've got some actual stats on that I don't have at my fingertips, Lisa. I know I'm going to completely disappoint you after throwing a bunch of stats at you all day today. But one of the things that we saw in the data is that when we ask employers, how do these two things relate? We actually asked explicitly what you asked there. And it was like, we need to be developing managers to know how to see the burnout, the stress, the things that are popping up in their employees, and how to serve them or how to get them the help they need, instead of saying, why doesn't Erick just work harder? Saying, what does Erick need that I can help provide? So that's one thing that tied in there. The other part is actual training around how do you deal with stress? How do you manage those sorts of things? I dropped in the chat earlier, I was speaking with the head of skills. I can't remember his title's like this long, Skills, Intelligence, and Insights for RBC up in Canada. And he was telling me that this year they're really leaning into not just looking at the hard skills, the technical skills of their people when they're hiring, the soft skills and human skills, but also their resilience and stress management. Because if you have those first two, but the second stress comes along and pressure comes along, which we all know we're going to face, if you crumble like a house of cards, it's not going to work out well long-term for the business or for whoever's in that role. So they're looking for the combination of those, where the exact fine tuning is to find the right person for either a front customer facing role versus someone who's back office and so on. So really trying to lean into that. So great questions, great interaction from all in the audience today. Thank you so much. I'll speak for the panel and saying, we appreciate that. We love that. That gives us energy, and we hope we give it back to you tenfold. Thank you to both of you, James, Erick, for participating today, for bringing your insights, your encouragement here to the audience. I know they appreciate it. Thank you to Skillable for hosting, and to all of you out there for doing the good work of learning, developing your people, serving them, and creating better outcomes for the business through the skills of your people. Keep up the good work. We know it's a hard journey, but it's a worthwhile one. Thank you so much. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day.